Hey, what you think you're doing? Shut off that damn noise.
Rock and roll, baby. Freedom of speech.
That guy rules.
I can't believe we made it.
We graduated high school. How totally amazing.
I can't help but feel I had some small part in how you turned out.
Sometimes I think I might be going crazy from sexual frustration.
You just hate every single guy on the face of the earth.
That's not true. I just hate all these extroverted, pseudo-bohemian losers.
You guys up for some reggae tonight?
Oh, what are we in slow motion here? Come on, what are you, hypnotized? Have some more kids, why don't you?
Ghost World. The underground comic book comes to life.
We have to get together this summer.
Yeah, that'll definitely happen.
And welcome back to another edition of Rare Delicacies. With me, as always, is
David.
Brett.
So now, gentlemen, if I were to ask you, what was the first comic book movie to actually be nominated for a legitimate Oscar? Not for special effects, not for editing, not for anything on the technical side, like one of the big ones. What'd you think?
Comic book?
Yeah. I'll beat you to it.
I have no idea.
Ghost World.
Huh.
Ghost World is actually the very first comic book-based movie to be nominated for Best Adapted Screenplay. Came out in the early 00s, and it's based on the independent graphic novel series by Daniel Klaus, who also did Art School Confidential, but the film itself was directed by Terry Zwigoff, who did the documentary Crumb, and the Christmas classic Bad Santa. Matter of fact, it was this movie that got him the gig to do Bad Santa. I'm sure when you look at this movie, you'll be like, man, that guy could totally direct a drunken Billy Bob Thornton. This film also marked a comeback performance of, even though many people will also credit American Beauty with that, a career-defining performance of Thora Birch, and also a very a highly celebrated early performance of Scarlett Johansson. I'm talking like it's still like a good, like maybe 8 years before she ever was Black Widow. I mean, it's still like a good amount of time beforehand.
Wow.
And also has Steve Buscemi at the height of his powers.
I was going to say, this right after Fargo and...
still riding high of that guy who was just funny looking. So...
Oh, wait, I can't say.
Yeah, exactly. But it was still a big deal that the Academy at the time was paying attention to what was happening in comic book media to be able to nominate something, because one could even say that after this one got a lot of praise, movies like A History of Violence, which was also based on a comic book, and Road to Perdition as well, also based on...
What about American...
American Splendor.
American Splendor.
And American Splendor, that was another major one as well. It went to show that they were actually like paying attention to what was going on beyond just the typical, oh, it's based on an old piece of literature, oh, it's based on a bestseller. The film's about two girls, Enid and Rebecca, who just graduated high school. Enid kind of is a person who is at one with her environment, where she doesn't want anything to change, but and is going through grand efforts to try and not change. And she ends up befriending a guy who is a kind of a hoarder, kind of likes old-timey stuff. They both are people who just kind of want things to stay a particular way, but of course, as time goes on, the world changes around them. See why I'm getting some blank stares from both of you.
No, I've
never seen...
So you guys have never heard of this at all?
No. I know very, very little about the film. I vaguely remember when it came out, and I remember going, oh, it looks like something I want to see, but I really wasn't watching movies at the time, and it just completely slipped under my radar.
Tabula rasa.
It's got all the praise when it first came out, and then poof, in a puff of smoke. I was working at Blockbuster around the time it came out, so of course I saw it, loved it, was telling everyone about it. And it actually made for an even easier sell when Bad Santa came out, because I was telling everyone, the guy who directed that did this. The look on their faces when they dropped this one back off, like going...
Wasn't expecting
that. So hopefully I get some...
Okay, could you imagine watching The Matrix say, oh yeah, the guys who did The Matrix did Bound?
Actually, yes, I could. I actually could.
Oh, okay.
Honestly, I think I built it up enough. This is...
After about 5 minutes of this movie, you're gonna wish you had 10 beers.
Thora Birch was initially offered the role of Rebecca, but turned the part down and insisted on playing Enid instead. According to director Terry Zwigoff, Steve Buscemi was so uncomfortable playing the role of Seymour that whenever shooting was finished for the day, he would immediately change his clothes so he could look completely different. Interested in directing Ghost World as a feature film, for some time, Terry Zwigoff sat in on an acting class in San Francisco. Zwigoff said that after the class had wrapped up, he had approached the instructor and asked if she could hold a crash course for him on how to direct actors. Seymour's room was modeled after director Terry Zwigoff's own room, particularly the shelved record collection, the pinup art, and the historical memorabilia.
I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah,
very much.
So, Crash Course, that ending.
I think it was a metaphor for her growing up and realizing that she needs to leave her childish pursuits behind.
I saw it sort of as full circle. It starts with her watching, one of the 60s, Indian kitsch, which, if you've ever seen, any of those, it's almost like the episode of The Simpsons where she says, but believe it or not, there's a completely satisfying explanation. You see an Otto busts into the bathroom, hey man, surf's up! And they're all on surfboards, and you never find out. It doesn't always make sense. Neither does life.
Actually, those are two drastically different interpretations of it. I mean, I've had so many customers back when I was renting this out who could not make heads or tails of it. I mean, you guys are way ahead of them. Already. Now, me, like I said, I've watched this movie a bunch of times. I've read the graphic novel. I took it on the fact that if you notice Enid, anytime she was always trying to, or she was confronted with the idea of actually growing up, actually getting a job,
right.
Notice how she always seems to deliberately sabotage herself in the process.
I'm only telling you this because we're such good friends. Medium is really only for suckers who don't know the concept of value.
What are you talking about? I mean, what kind of loser gets fired after one day?
Because she very clearly seems to want to just stay that way. The only person, there are two people in the movie who are obviously like that. Steve Buscemi's character and the old guy sitting on the bus, or sitting there at the bench. He's pretty much the most simplistic interpretation of it. He's just sitting there, just waiting, because the simplest thing he can do, sit there for a bus that may never come. And all of a sudden, bus comes, takes him away. It's, in a way, it's kind of a personification of the world changing around Enid, and ultimately, he's getting buried by it. By the very end, if you notice another thing about that bus, there's no markings on it. There's no number.
There's no people.
There's no other people on it.
To be honest, I almost wondered if it was a metaphor for death.
It could be.
Yeah.
It could actually be. I mean, because if you notice...
I thought that too.
Yeah, because if that bench was actually in service, it wouldn't...
say, no, not in service.
Yeah, the bench still said not in service. It would have said something. They would have fixed that bench. So it drops the hint that in all likelihood, Enid just wasted away, just let herself get buried just as the world changed around her, because everyone else she knew was actually moving forward. Rebecca was growing up. You saw she had a job. She hated it, but it was a job.
Yeah.
Dream of your own apartment.
Yeah. It's actually been a while since I've watched it. For the longest time, I think when I was watching it, I was like Enid, fresh out of high school, and had that kind of self-righteous attitude of wanting to be like so unique and so like, oh, no one truly understands me. Then as time goes on, we start feeling a bit more like Seymour. You said that.
I very much felt that way when I first started watching it. I went, I remembered being Thora, Enid. I wanted to be my own special snowflake. I wanted to be go my own way and do everything. But deep down, I really wanted everybody's approval. For me, a very telling scene was she dyes her hair green.
Yeah.
And then everybody hates it, so she immediately gets rid of it.
Yeah.
Because then Steve shows up, and I'm like, yeah, but I'm now Steve.
Mm-hmm.
I'm now Seymour. I'm now Seymour. A guy who's been, he's got a life. It's not a great one, but he's got one. And then this, I empathize with him so much because there's this girl hanging around him. He's going like, okay, look, there's no polite way for me to tell you you're young enough to be my daughter. People are going to look at us funny if we're hanging out too much together.
Well, do you think Seymour might actually kind of be maybe adult personification of what Enid might become?
I definitely see that, 20 years.
Possible, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, because as we see where Seymour wound up at the very end, living with his mom. In all likelihood, that's probably where, in a way, that's kind of where she's going to end up, kind of digging herself in a little hole, just hoarding stuff and just not really doing much else, and probably deliberately separating herself off from the rest of humanity. I guess I lied saying that this was a comedy. I mean, this is a dramedy to a slight extent.
Yeah, black humor's the best kind.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely dark humor. Actually, I was going to tell you some of the differences from the comic to this. The comic is much more episodic. A lot of things that you did see here, specifically between Enid and Rebecca, does take place. The thing that's not in there, Seymour.
What?
He's personified by a character just some random character that she was trying to find, just to kind of make sense of everything around her, but he's kind of a minor character, but they kind of expanded it.
Wow.
You can't say that it was someone taking life of someone else's work. This was actually adapted by Bill Terry Zwigoff and Daniel Klaus. From your point of view, how did you react to everything that you saw?
It's a little, sort of a minor quibble, and it actually makes perfect sense. Like David mentioned, when his boss at Cook Chicken, what can you tell us about this? Yeah, they might know about his proclivities. Having a strong suspicion is one thing. Proving it is another.
Well,
and but for the sake of the story, it fits.
There was something actually that, I forgot to remind you about. When she found it, he said that he took it from the.
Well, yeah,
but he also said 15 years ago.
Yeah, 15 years ago.
That. Plus, he was a manager. It makes sense. Yeah, the manager's fingerprints are on it. Okay, yeah. What else you got?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like I say, a strong suspicion that you were the one that walked off with it. That's one thing. Prove it.
You've seen how, the companies we work for, you know how sensitive they are when it comes to anyone making a public spectacle of.
Oh, of course.
Yeah. And how, of course, the first thing they're going to do is point the finger at the person who's pulling the veil, as opposed to the people responsible for what's under the veil. Most, especially older corporations, always seem to really go for diversity. If you look at their long, lurid history, in all likelihood they've been sued for discrimination, God knows how many times.
Yeah.
But they try to bury it by saying, we're the most diverse company now.
Mm-hmm.
So the key thing of avoiding being like Seymour is being more willing to reach out to people a bit more, because I think that is ultimately his problem, and that was obviously Enid's problem, was her lack of eagerness to alienate people. And because if you know, she even by the end she was pushing away her best friend, who she'd been friends with for years, but very gradually she's even alienating her. And obviously Seymour becoming so set in his ways. And if you notice, every time she tried to hook him up with someone or just try to figure him out, he always immediately came up with some kind of excuse. Afterwards, you can tell he's probably been so set in his ways of trying to find ways to push people away.
Yeah.
And
let's be honest, Enid's trying to hook him up with somebody else was, I want you to hook up with me, this is my... I mean, I think she was denying it at the time. I think it was genuine on her part at the time. I think it was just, she wanted him, but didn't want to admit it to herself.
Yeah.
And I think she finally admitted it when she started becoming jealous. Then when he finally getting jealous.
Jealous of Dana, because that's true. She did encourage it when he got the call. That is absolutely true.
Plus knowing that, there's no indication that she knew the other person, but the fact that even when she seemed to be partly successful, she comes over and actually talks to Seymour, and it turns out she's not there for the
Rebecca
first person. No, for the first band, she's there for the quote unquote blues.
Yeah.
Band. I just don't know why the fat one is so mean to the skinny one.
Yeah, that's another thing about this movie that I say
knowing
even
how
more
he's
so.
going to react to that.
Yeah, even more so. I think the major thing that still works about this movie is the social satire regarding the way the new pretty much looks upon the older stuff. Look at the way friggin' Blues Hammer is a bunch of white guys singing songs about picking cotton.
Actually, I looked at it kind of like nerds. Just nerds in general. It's like, you like this thing? Well, yeah, but let's go into the deep minutia of this.
If you notice, there was a strong emphasis on pretty much just the concrete, the power lines, and even all the chains that are like all over the place.
Yeah.
I always kind of wondered to myself when I first saw this movie what the title Ghost World even meant specifically. I mean, now actually that was a good question to lead it to. What does the title Ghost World mean to you?
Honestly, I'm not quite sure. I really, I hadn't even, until you brought it up, it just now occurred. What does that have to do? Then again, you know, again with what I had said about the ending, sometimes life doesn't make sense.
I think it's one of two ways. Seymour and Enid are the ghosts. They're the ones moving through this world that they can they really can't interact with it because they don't really know how, but they can see it all happening around them.
Okay.
Looks like they're relics.
Kind of, yeah.
One young, one old.
Yeah.
Older.
My interpretation was always kind of like the flip side, where because Enid and Seymour were people who always seemed to obsess about trying to stay in one spot, and the world moves around them and is changing, is consistent. Even Rebecca, who was like Enid at the beginning, very gradually just becoming something different, and of course, and even the idea that the old man at the bench now is also being picked up by the bus. You're in here, all right. You made the game is bomb. Because it begs the question. I mean, all the environments, there's like not a single lick of nature like around them.
That's true.
Yeah, and so it kind of punctuates our whole concept of trying to solidify everything in concrete, steel, and all that. We try to like make something that's solid, but unfortunately things change around you. Like a 1950s diner that for some reason now plays 80s pop and hip hop.
Yeah.
So. I don't know. I feel like I'm depressing you guys with these.
No. Well, life can be depressing.
Well, but if you let it, I think that's the hitch. I think you just, the world changes around you. I think the key thing you got to do is just change with it. Otherwise, you kind of get drowned. I mean, that's what I always kind of took away from it.
The short version is, I, for one, strongly recommend it. This was an excellent film. Really, really excellent. I'm very glad I saw it.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. Quite enjoyed it. I like that. I like an unusual story, and this was absolutely unusual story.
Definitely good. It still works for me even after the decade since 2001 when it first came out on videos. I will probably put this in the menu that you'd find at one of those cheap 50s diners that play Milli Vanilli on the jukebox. Those exist. They're out there.
With the out of sync lip sync.
Oh yeah. All that. In the meantime, see you guys.
जान पहचान हो जीना आसान हो जान पहचान हो जीना आसान हो दिल को चुराने वालों आँख न चुराओ नाम तो बताओ जान पहचान हो